Get ready to witness how Karoline Leavitt, once written off, turned a defamation hearing into a stunning expose that rocked the justice system. This isn't fiction. It's real, raw, and unforgettable. So settle in, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into a story that proves one voice really can make a difference. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the clock above the door in courtroom B of the Wake County Justice Center ticked past 9:58 a.m. The room was modest, wood-paneled walls, worn benches, a dusty state flag pinned behind the bench, but it pulsed with quiet anticipation. A row of law students from a nearby university scribbled in their notepads, unaware that today's hearing would be unlike anything they'd observed before. At the front of the room, Judge Franklin Harlan reclined slightly in his high-backed chair, flipping through the docket with a kind of casual arrogance that suggested he already knew how today would end. He was known in Raleigh for being theatrical in court, his gavel more a stage prop than a tool of justice. But this morning he seemed especially smug, like a man ready to put on a show. Just before the bailiff called the session to order, Karoline Leavitt stepped through the double doors. She wore a navy blue suit, slim folder in hand, hair tied back in a precise twist. She didn't rush. She didn't scan the room. She walked like someone who had already been judged too many times and no longer cared about impressing anyone. A few students whispered to each other, recognizing her name from recent political headlines. Once a rising star in political communications, now a woman branded by scandal, allegedly ousted from her career after a former colleague accused her of falsifying campaign data. The rumors had spread fast, and the damage to her reputation had been swift and unforgiving. Judge Harlan glanced down at his notes, then back up at her with a smirk. "Ah, yes," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Miss Leavitt, the one with a reputation problem." The students shifted uncomfortably. The defendant's legal team smirked, but Karoline didn't flinch. "I'm here to give my statement, Your Honor," she said evenly, her voice low but clear. Her attorney, Marcus Linwood, a quiet but methodical civil rights lawyer from Durham, stood up beside her. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "we'd appreciate a respectful tone. This is a defamation hearing, not a roast." Judge Harlan didn't even look at him. "Save it, counselor. I'll run this courtroom how I see fit." And just like that, the tone was set. One part intimidation, one part performance. Karoline took her seat at the front, folding her hands in her lap, her posture straight. Her eyes didn't dart around the room. She didn't fidget. She simply waited, because while Harlan thought he was about to control the narrative, Karoline had come for more than vindication. She had come for the truth. And buried deep in the folder in her hand, labeled simply CL Court 42, was the kind of truth that doesn't just shift a courtroom, it cracks the foundation beneath it. The clerk swore her in with a "I didn't come here today just to salvage my name," she began, her voice calm but unshakable. "That part's already been dragged through the mud." The students in the back stopped writing. Even Judge Harlan, leaning back with that trademark smirk, stopped spinning his pen. "I came here because if I don't speak, then the lies that gutted my life get to live as truth, and I refuse to let that happen." She told the court about her time at Halcyon Strategies, a boutique political consulting firm where she'd been rising quickly through the ranks. Her role as a press secretary had given her access to sensitive campaigns and major donors. That ended the week she resigned when, at a private fundraiser, Jasper Clay, a longtime associate of Halcyon's founder, casually suggested to a journalist that Karoline had been asked to leave due to data manipulation. The quote had been published without her name, but insiders knew. Within days, clients pulled contracts, briefings stopped. Even her landlord grew wary, citing concerns about reputational risk. "It wasn't just a rumor," Karoline said, voice still steady. "It was a targeted whisper, perfectly timed." She paused, then continued. "And it worked. I went from managing communications for Senate candidates to managing job rejections." Judge Harlan sighed theatrically. "So, you're suggesting a single offhand remark tanked your entire career?" "No," Karoline replied, her gaze flicking toward him. "I'm saying it was a coordinated effort, one designed to make me expendable, and it succeeded." Linwood stood to submit initial documentation, timelines, correspondence, client withdrawals. But Karoline didn't sit down. "One of the men involved," she said, "had a vested interest in seeing me removed. Jasper Clay was in negotiations for a major contract with Halcyon at the time. Getting me out of the way made that path smoother." Murmurs rippled across the gallery. Karoline didn't flinch. She wasn't reading accusations. She was remembering a life that had been quietly, efficiently dismantled. And for the first time, she wasn't just holding on to fragments of what was lost. She was building a case, one word, one email, one truth at a time. Behind the bench, Judge Harlan scribbled lazily on a notepad, but something in his posture had shifted. It was subtle, less smug, more cautious. He knew what was coming. And Karoline, she had only just begun. Judge Franklin Harlan leaned back in his chair, the corners of his mouth twitching in what might have passed for amusement or condescension. "So, let me get this straight," he said, tapping his pen against the bench. "A passing comment at a party, and suddenly you're the tragic hero of a political takedown?" The sarcasm laced his tone like poison. The courtroom tensed. Even the defense attorney, Nadia Ellis, shifted uncomfortably in her chair, sensing the performance was veering into dangerous territory. Karoline didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence, steady and still, only made the judge's theatrics seem louder. Her attorney, Marcus Linwood, stood again, voice firm but composed. "Your Honor, we respectfully request that commentary like that be reserved. Ms. Leavitt is here to seek redress through the court, not to be personally belittled by the bench." Judge Harlan didn't look at him. "Counselor, I've been running this courtroom longer than your client's been in politics. I know a media stunt when I see one." His words cut through the room like a blade, a few gasps from the gallery, a cough from the back. Karoline's grip on the microphone tightened, but she didn't waver. The mask had dropped. Whatever illusion of impartiality the judge had maintained was gone now. His interruptions, the mockery, the dismissive chuckles. This wasn't just personal irritation. It was prejudice, a pre-written verdict wrapped in robed authority. To him, Karoline wasn't a woman wronged. She was a woman who dared to question power, and that made her dangerous. But what Harlan didn't realize was that his arrogance wasn't silencing her. It was building her case. Every smirk, every interruption, every flippant remark was now fuel for what was about to come, and in that moment, as he leaned forward preparing to dismiss her testimony again, Karoline finally met his gaze, not with anger, but with clarity. She saw him for what he was, not a judge, but a man playing judge, and soon she would reveal just how deep his performance ran. The courtroom had begun to settle again, but Karoline Leavitt wasn't finished, and neither was her attorney. As Judge Harlan reached for his gavel to signal a pause in testimony, Marcus Linwood stepped forward and calmly placed a sealed folder onto the edge of the bench. Its label, simple and sharp in black marker, read, CL 42. Harlan glanced at it with barely concealed irritation. "And what exactly is this?" he asked. Linwood straightened. "Evidence, Your Honor, submitted under Rule 26. It pertains directly to the motive behind the defamatory statements made against Ms. Leavitt, and more importantly, to the integrity of this proceeding." The room grew still. Karoline sat upright, watching not the judge, but the impact her words were about to deliver. Linwood opened the folder, sliding a printed email across the table to the clerk, who passed it to the bench. "This document," he said, "is an internal communication obtained during discovery, dated 2 days before the fundraiser in question." He turned slightly toward the audience, but his words were meant for the judge. "It is from Jasper Clay, addressed to the defendant." Judge Harlan flipped the page with mild disinterest until his eyes landed on the sentence highlighted in yellow. He read it silently once, then again, slower. "Once we move Karoline out of the picture, the board will be a lot more flexible." A hush fell over the room like a blanket. Even the students in the gallery stopped scribbling. Karoline leaned forward. "That comment wasn't a slip," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. It was the start of a coordinated effort to remove me. And it wasn't just about revenge. It was about money. Jasper Clay had a pending investment contract tied to Halcyon's board approval. I was an obstacle. Harlan tried to maintain composure, but his pen stilled in his hand. "Do you have corroborating evidence?" he asked sharply. "You're accusing a third party of—" "We're not accusing," Linwood interrupted, placing a second document on the bench. "We're submitting." It was another email, this time from the defendant, replying to Clay, "Understood, I'll steer the narrative as discussed. She's already on the fringe." Karoline added quietly, "My career didn't collapse by chance. It was arranged." The temperature in the courtroom had shifted completely. What began as a defamation case now hinted at corporate collusion. And yet, Karoline wasn't looking for sympathy. She was laying the groundwork for something far more dangerous, the truth. And as the judge stared at the documents, his jaw slightly tightened. It became clear that for the first time, he didn't control the narrative. Karoline did. And this folder? This was only the beginning. Karoline watched Judge Harlan closely now. His fingers gripped the edges of the documents just a little too tightly. He masked it well, his voice even, his face calm, but something had shifted. Marcus Linwood didn't let the moment slip. He reached into his briefcase again and placed another folder onto the bench. This one marked only with the name of a shell company, Merriman Equity Partners. "We're submitting one final document, Your Honor," Marcus said. "This pertains to financial disclosures filed by the court during the last fiscal year." Judge Harlan barely looked up. "Explain." Karoline spoke this time. "This document shows that Merriman Equity Partners, an investment group with direct ties to the defendant's firm, lists your name, Judge Harlan, as a passive investor through a shared real estate portfolio. That fund, Merriman, holds equity in Halcyon Strategies." The air was suddenly heavier. No gavel dropped, no objections were raised, only the sound of the page being turned, and the collective tightening of shoulders around the courtroom. "Are you insinuating I have a conflict of interest in this case?" Harlan asked, his voice sharper than before. "We're not insinuating," Karoline replied. "We're submitting proof. It's in the public financial disclosures filed with the North Carolina State Ethics Commission, and cross-referenced with shareholder records in Massachusetts." Even the defense attorney, Nadia Ellis, shifted in her seat, a flicker of unease betraying her usual polish. Judge Harlan sat back, his pen now resting idle on the pad. For a moment, it was no longer his courtroom. The power had cracked. Linwood remained composed. "We are formally requesting that the court consider whether continued oversight by Judge Harlan in this matter constitutes a breach of judicial impartiality." Silence. Then, in a tone absent of its usual bravado, Judge Harlan muttered, "We'll take a short recess." And without another word, he stood up and exited through the side door, leaving behind a courtroom full of stunned observers and one woman who had just dismantled the illusion of untouchable authority with nothing more than truth and a folder. 15 minutes passed in tense silence before the side door creaked open again, not with Judge Harlan returning, but with a new figure stepping onto the bench. Judge Rena Valdez, known throughout the state for her no-nonsense courtroom demeanor and icy impartiality, entered with a gray blazer instead of a robe, and a thick case file already open in her hands. She didn't smile, didn't greet the room, just scanned the faces, then said flatly, "Due to an administrative concern involving the presiding judge, I've been assigned to review this matter moving forward." The shift in energy was immediate. The arrogance that had clouded the morning air was gone. In its place, procedural clarity. Karoline Leavitt stayed perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Marcus Linwood stood with composed confidence beside her. They had delivered the truth. Now, the system had to respond. Judge Valdez wasted no time. "The court will recess for 30 minutes while I review submitted materials, particularly those contained in Exhibits CL42 and the Merriman Equity documents. Upon verification, I will determine whether further proceedings under Judge Harlan should be nullified or reviewed." Even Nadia Ellis, the defense attorney, appeared visibly rattled. She glanced at her client behind her, whispers passed, but there was no smugness now, only calculation. Before leaving the bench, Judge Valdez said one last thing. If what is alleged here holds merit, we may be dealing with a non-trivial breach of judicial conduct. I will be contacting the North Carolina Judicial Standards Commission immediately. And just like that, the courtroom was no longer a stage. It had become something rarer, a space where power was being held to account. As the judge exited, Karoline exhaled softly, her eyes fixed forward. She hadn't come for revenge. She hadn't come to make headlines. She came to dislodge the truth from the silence it had been buried under. And with one folder and one voice, she had done just that. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with quiet speculation, but that buzz turned electric the moment a court staffer burst through the main doors, eyes wide, phone in hand. She hurried over to Marcus Linwood, whispering urgently. Karoline watched as he took the phone, brows furrowing as he scrolled. Within seconds, his expression tightened. He turned the screen toward her. There it was, a breaking post from Southern Civic Watch, Raleigh's most read legal blog. The headline read, Judge Franklin Harlan linked to investment firm backing defendant in active case. Below it, screenshots of the very documents submitted minutes earlier in court. Judge Harlan's signature, the Merriman Equity Partners stake, the fund's direct ties to Halcyon Strategies. It's online, Marcus murmured. Someone leaked it. Karoline leaned in, her voice barely above a breath. It wasn't supposed to be public yet. Valdez hasn't ruled. But it didn't matter now. The story was out. Phones across the courthouse lit up. Reporters began arriving within minutes, local news anchors assembling by the steps. The legal world, and soon the political one, was about to witness something rare. A sitting judge caught in real-time conflict of interest exposure. As word spread beyond the courtroom, Karoline stood on the steps outside, eyes scanning the forming crowd. She hadn't released the leak, but deep down she knew someone wanted the truth seen now, not later. And now, the system had no choice but to face it. By the next morning, the story had outgrown Raleigh. Major outlets picked it up with headlines like, Judge under ethics probe after conflict disclosure bombshell, and defamation case sparks judicial scandal in North Carolina. The Judicial Standards Commission released a brief but stunning statement. Judge Franklin Harlan has been placed on temporary administrative leave pending further investigation. Inside Marcus Linwood's office, Karoline sat quietly, her coffee untouched, eyes locked on the muted TV screen replaying footage of the courthouse steps. Her name was everywhere. Cable news, blogs, podcasts. Some called her brave. Others called the situation political. But through the noise, one thing was certain. She had told the truth, and it had stuck. Marcus sat across from her, watching her more than the screen. You okay? He asked. Karoline nodded slowly. I didn't want this to go that far, she said. I just wanted him off the case. Marcus stirred his coffee. He took himself down, he said. You just turned on the lights. The weight of it all settled in. Not guilt, but gravity. She hadn't destroyed anyone. She hadn't screamed. She'd simply refused to shrink. Now the system was being forced to answer questions it had long avoided. And while Karoline didn't know what would happen next, one thing was clear. She wasn't invisible anymore. The following week, Judge Rena Valdez reconvened the court with no cameras, no grand statements, just a firm, steady tone. Effective immediately, she announced, this case will proceed under the supervision of Judge Patrick Dwyer. All prior rulings under Judge Harlan's oversight will be reviewed for procedural integrity. No objections were raised. Even the defense team sat stiffly, their earlier confidence vanished. There were no smirks now, only silence. Karoline Leavitt, seated beside Marcus Linwood, didn't smile. She didn't need to. This wasn't a victory of noise, but of clarity. The case that once seemed stacked against her was finally in neutral hands, moving on merit, not bias. Later, as they walked down the courthouse steps, reporters called her name, but she didn't stop. She didn't need a headline. She'd had enough of those. That night, she posted just one sentence to her professional page. Truth matters even when it's inconvenient. And with that, she closed her laptop, exhaled slowly, and for the first time in a long time, let herself believe that fairness still had a place in the system, even if it had to be fought for, one voice at a time. 2 weeks later, the noise had faded, the headlines cooled, and the courthouse resumed its usual rhythm. But for Karoline Leavitt, something fundamental had changed. She stood alone on the granite steps of the Wake County Justice Center, coat pulled tight against the morning chill. No cameras, no questions, just stillness. Inside, her case under Judge Dwyer was finally progressing without disruption. No bias, no hidden strings, no theatrics. It wasn't glamorous, but it was fair, and for the first time in months, that was enough. That afternoon, over coffee at a quiet cafe near the courthouse, Marcus Linwood asked gently, "Do you regret it?" Karoline paused. Her gaze drifted to the window, where people walked by unaware of what had taken place in that courtroom weeks ago. "No," she said. "If I'd kept my head down, I'd still be working half hours, wondering who was whispering behind my back. Now, I look people in the eye again." Marcus nodded slowly. "Sometimes standing up doesn't fix everything," he said, "but it changes something inside you. That's where it starts." Karoline didn't answer. She didn't need to. In that moment she knew, justice doesn't always roar. It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives in fragments, in silence, in the quiet act of refusing to be silenced. The story of Karoline Leavitt reminds us that justice doesn't always come in loud victories or sweeping declarations. It often begins quietly, with one person refusing to be silenced. Karoline didn't set out to expose corruption or spark a legal firestorm. She simply wanted fairness. But by standing her ground, the lesson is clear: power unchecked is dangerous. But truth, even when inconvenient, can shift the balance. Karoline's quiet persistence cracked the illusion of invincibility surrounding a judge who had abused his authority, not with rage, but with receipts. And through her courage, the system was forced to reckon with itself. We often think change requires a platform or a spotlight, but as Karoline showed, sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a voice in a courtroom, a document in a folder, and a decision to no longer accept what is unjust. The takeaway? Speak up, even when your voice shakes, because silence protects the powerful, but truth empowers the brave.